Some stories are too dark to believe. Some lives are written in blood, and some legends are born in shadows. This is the story of Rafael, a boy who became one of the most feared killers in history, a man whose life of vengeance and violence would shock the world. From his first murders as a teenager to his prison reign and deadly legacy, nothing about his story is ordinary. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about justice, morality, and the human mind. Everyone thinks monsters are born in the shadows, but sometimes, they are born in plain sight. Rafael was 15, and his life was about to take a turn so dark it would leave an indelible mark on everyone who would ever hear his story. He lived in a quiet town in northern Argentina, where everyone knew each other, and life seemed ordinary, almost painfully normal. But Rafael, he was different. Even as a boy, there was a coldness in his eyes, an unsettling detachment from the feelings that moved other people. While his classmates laughed, joked, and cried, Rafael watched silently, studying the world around him with the sharp, calculating gaze of someone who didn't belong. It all began on a sweltering afternoon in the spring of 1972. Rafael had just returned home from school when his mother's frantic cries filled the small house. His father, who worked as a janitor at the local school, had been accused of stealing food from the cafeteria. Rafael's stomach turned as he listened to the story. The principal of the school wanted his father fired immediately, and despite any explanations or pleas, the decision was made. Rafael's father, a hard-working man, was removed from his post. Rafael's young mind did not process this like most teenagers. Most would have been angry, frustrated, or sad. Rafael, he felt something deeper. Something dark, a simmering rage that refused to be ignored. He paced his room that night, replaying the humiliation, imagining the principal smirking as his father's life unraveled. By morning, he had made a decision, a choice that would change his life forever. The next day, he set out, walking the familiar streets with the cold determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. He didn't plan on talking, negotiating, or explaining. He just wanted justice, or at least, his version of it. The principal, a pompous man named Federico, was standing outside the school offices when Rafael arrived. Without hesitation, Rafael pulled a small revolver he had secretly kept hidden and fired. One shot, then another, and Federico collapsed, lifeless, on the steps. The shock rippled through the town like wildfire. But Rafael wasn't done. His father had often hinted that another man, a colleague named Hugo, had actually been the one taking the food. Rafael hunted him down without delay. When he found Hugo, he didn't speak. He didn't pause. He simply executed him, leaving behind a silent scene that would haunt the town for months. Now a fugitive at just 15 years old, Rafael disappeared into the shadows. He fled for 3 hours, eventually arriving in a larger city to the south, where nobody knew him. It was here that he met Camilla, a striking woman with an aura of mystery. They connected quickly, and it wasn't long before she was pregnant with his child. Rafael found a strange sense of purpose in their life together, though it was always tinged with a dangerous edge. What Rafael didn't know was that Camilla was the widow of a feared local crime lord, someone who had once controlled the city's underworld with an iron fist. By the time Rafael realized this, it was too late. He was drawn into her late husband's empire. Within months, Rafael had taken control of the operations, quickly establishing himself as ruthless and unyielding. Rival gang members were eliminated with precision, leaving the city whispering his name in fear. But as quickly as he rose, tragedy struck. While Rafael was away handling business, Camilla was brutally murdered by members of a rival gang. The news hit him like a thunderbolt. Unlike others, Rafael did not crumble. He did not cry. He did not plead. He planned. Every ounce of rage, every ounce of calculated brutality he had honed over the past years, now had a single target: vengeance. He hunted them relentlessly. Streets he had once walked freely became a map of terror for his enemies. He tracked, tortured, and executed with cold precision, leaving behind a trail that would make even hardened criminals shiver. People began to whisper about Rafael not just as a man, but as a force, a shadow that took the lives of anyone who stood in his way or wronged those he cared about. And yet, even in this chaos, Rafael maintained a strange sense of code. He didn't kill indiscriminately. Those who harmed women, children, or innocent people were marked in his mind. Even friends or close allies were not safe if they broke his moral rules. To Rafael, justice and vengeance were one and the same, and anyone who violated that balance was doomed. This was just the beginning. By the time Rafael reached the age of 18, he would have left a trail of bodies behind him that even the most experienced law enforcement officers struggled to comprehend. But how does a boy who began as a quiet, cold observer transform into a man who would terrorize an entire country? That is a story of rage, revenge, and the darkness that can live inside a single human heart. Some men are born to follow, others are born to hunt. After the brutal murder of Camilla, Rafael's life became a relentless hunt. The quiet boy who had once observed the world with cold detachment was now a predator, every thought consumed by vengeance. The city streets he had once navigated with careful anonymity now became the hunting grounds for his rage. No one in his path would escape, and he would not rest until those responsible had paid in full. Rafael's first act of revenge was precise and terrifying. He spent days tracking down each member of the rival gang, learning their routines, their weaknesses, and the people they cared about. There was no hesitation, no mercy, only meticulous planning. He struck at night, moving through alleys and backstreets like a phantom. Each act of retribution was calculated. A man shot outside a bar, another ambushed on a quiet street corner. By the time the first week of his revenge spree ended, the city was whispering rumors of a ghostly executioner, a young man with eyes cold enough to freeze blood. But it wasn't just random violence, it was a carefully orchestrated statement. Rafael wanted the gang to know that no crime would go unpunished, that their actions had consequences. Weeks passed, and still, he hunted. He spared no effort, following leads, interrogating anyone who might know the gang's movements. His actions left a trail of bodies that would later be compared to scenes from the most violent movies, but this was no fiction. This was real, and the terror was palpable. Eventually, Rafael discovered the identity of the gang leader responsible for Camilla's murder. It was a man named Victor Serrano, a cunning and arrogant figure who believed himself untouchable. Victor was organizing a lavish wedding for his younger sister, an event meant to flaunt his power and wealth. To Rafael, it was the perfect opportunity. Armed with a small group of loyal allies, he planned an attack that would leave a mark on the city forever. The day of the wedding arrived, and Rafael and his team slipped into the celebration like shadows. Guests laughed, music played, and the city's elite indulged in opulence, completely unaware that death was about to enter the room. Without warning, Rafael and his team opened fire. Chaos erupted instantly. Screams echoed through the grand hall as bullets tore through the air. 7 people fell lifeless, 16 more were injured, and panic spread like wildfire. Among the smoke and screams, Rafael disappeared, leaving behind only carnage and a city in shock. Despite the horror, Rafael's sense of justice, or vengeance, was far from complete. Months later, he learned of another perceived injustice. His young cousin had been impregnated, and the father of the child had refused responsibility. Worse, the man had fled to avoid any part of the child's life. Rafael could not allow this. Responsibility, he believed, was sacred, and those who shirked it would face consequences. Following a trail that led him to the bustling outskirts of Buenos Aires, Rafael found the man lounging on a private farm, carefree and oblivious. Words were unnecessary. Rafael approached silently, and within moments, bullets were exchanged. By the time it was over, the man lay dead in the dirt, a final reckoning for his cowardice. Even as Rafael's body count grew, he began to understand the precariousness of his own existence. He had become a fugitive, hunted by the law but still untouchable by the men he pursued. Each act of vengeance strengthened his legend, and people began to whisper his name in fear and awe. Rafael was no longer just a man, he was a force, a reckoning, a shadow of death stalking the streets. Yet even predators are not invincible. By 1977, when Rafael turned 20, the authorities finally caught up with him. Arrested after years of eluding capture, he confessed to 10 murders immediately. The court, unable to ignore the magnitude of his crimes, sentenced him to 130 years in prison. But Rafael's violent nature could not be contained. Even behind bars, he continued to kill. A fellow inmate convicted of assaulting women became his first target. Strangled to death in the back of a prison transport van, the murder was both a warning and a declaration. Rafael did not stop. Inside the prison walls, his reign continued. Drug dealers, murderers, and violent criminals became victims of his twisted moral code. Rafael killed those he deemed irredeemable, always following his own rules. Friends in prison were not spared if they violated them. He executed a close inmate friend who had murdered his own sister, demonstrating that loyalty had limits in his eyes. Some acts were shockingly trivial to outsiders. One cellmate, guilty only of snoring too loudly, became a victim, a reminder that Rafael's mind had grown unpredictable and dangerous. But even in this chaos, there was method. Rafael studied, planned, and executed. Every action served a purpose, whether for vengeance, punishment, or his personal sense of justice. And yet, life in prison was about to test him in ways he had never expected. In a twist of fate, Rafael's father, now a violent man living on the outside, murdered his mother in a fit of rage. The law sent his father to the same prison, albeit in a different wing. When Rafael learned this, he felt a cold clarity. Blood had to be repaid with blood. Bribing guards to gain access, Rafael approached his father and ended his life in a brutal, unforgettable act. The killing was savage, personal, and unrelenting, a culmination of years of anger, hatred, and a code only he understood. By now, Rafael's story had become legend, even behind bars. The young boy who had begun with the murder of a school principal had transformed into a man whose life was defined by vengeance, violence, and an unyielding personal code. But the story was far from over. Even after decades, even after prison, Rafael would find ways to return to the world outside, to haunt the living, and to etch his name into history as one of the most feared figures of his generation. And as the years passed, the question lingered, could a man like Rafael ever truly change, or was the darkness inside him eternal? Some prisons hold bodies, but Rafael held something far darker. By the late 1970s, Rafael's life had entered a new, even more dangerous phase. At just 20 years old, he had already committed more murders than most would in a lifetime, and now, behind the cold, unyielding walls of the provincial prison, he faced a world that was just as lethal, if not more so, than the streets he had once haunted. Rafael's early days in prison were tense. The guards knew of his reputation, and other inmates had heard whispers of the young fugitive who had executed an entire gang and left a trail of bodies. In the prison hierarchy, Rafael was an enigma, feared, respected, but also unpredictable. The prison was filled with hardened criminals, drug lords, serial killers, rapists, and those who preyed on the weak. For Rafael, it was a hunting ground, a place where his own brutal moral code could be exercised with almost limitless opportunity. It wasn't long before he struck. During a routine transfer in a cramped prison van, Rafael found himself beside a man convicted of assaulting women. Without warning, Rafael attacked. The inmate didn't even have time to react before Rafael had strangled him to death. To outsiders, it might have seemed sudden, irrational, or senseless, but for Rafael, it was justice in its purest, most immediate form. Inside the prison walls, Rafael's pattern continued. He hunted those he deemed evil, with a cold precision. Drug dealers who preyed on children, violent criminals who terrorized innocents, even fellow murderers who crossed the line, none were spared. At times, his killings were calculated, other times, they were reactions to perceived slights, a loud snore, or disrespect. Yet, even in his unpredictability, Rafael adhered to a personal code. Only those he judged truly evil would die by his hand. His actions earned him both notoriety and enemies. Some inmates tried to test him, planning ambushes and attacks. But Rafael was always ready. When warned of a plot by 5 inmates to jump him in the courtyard, he did not panic. Instead, he secretly acquired a knife from a guard and, when the attack came, he fought with terrifying skill, stabbing 3 of the 5 attackers, leaving them dead, and sending a chilling message to anyone else who might challenge him. Even amidst the carnage, life had a cruel twist waiting for him. His father, a violent man in his own right, killed Rafael's mother outside of prison and was subsequently incarcerated. By fate, or perhaps by design, he ended up in the same prison, though in a separate wing. When Rafael learned of his father's imprisonment, he knew what had to be done. Blood demanded blood. Bribing guards to gain access, Rafael entered his father's cell under the guise of a reconciliation. But this was no reunion. With a makeshift shank in hand, he brutally stabbed his father repeatedly. And in a final act of unthinkable horror, Rafael removed his father's heart and consumed it. It was a macabre end to a story already drenched in violence. Prison could not contain Rafael. His reputation grew, whispers of his deeds traveled beyond the walls, cementing his status as a living legend among criminals. He was a paradox, a monster by the world's standards, yet guided by his own perverse sense of justice. Years passed, and even though the law had sentenced him to over a century behind bars, Argentina's maximum sentence laws allowed for release after 30 years. By 2002, Rafael was 52 years old and walked free. But freedom did not soften him. In fact, the world outside seemed almost dull after decades of navigating the dangers of his own life. He adapted, reinventing himself as a public figure in ways no one could have imagined. Using the anonymity of the internet and social media, Rafael created a new persona, a reformed man sharing his story, encouraging others to learn from his life, and warning them against the path he had chosen. Rafael launched a YouTube channel, sharing vlogs of daily life, spiritual journeys, and even his baptism. He gained a massive following, reaching hundreds of thousands on TikTok, speaking openly about his past with a mix of reflection and charisma. On podcasts and interviews, he recounted his crimes and his philosophy of justice, attempting to guide viewers toward a life of discipline and morality, but always haunted by the shadow of the man he once was. Despite his new public persona, Rafael's past was never far behind. The world he had terrorized decades earlier remembered him, and old grudges never die quietly. In early 2024, while visiting a relative's home on a quiet street, two masked men arrived in a black vehicle. Rafael barely had time to react before the first shots rang out. 4 bullets struck him, but the killers were not finished. They stepped out and used a knife to end his life definitively. To this day, the identities of Rafael's killers remain unknown. The motives, the planning, and the justice behind his assassination are shrouded in mystery. Some speculate it was vengeance from one of his many enemies, others believe it was someone he had once spared but who later decided that no one could escape the consequences of crossing Rafael. What remains undeniable is the story of a man who began as a detached, quiet boy and became a legend of fear, violence, and moral extremity. From the streets of a small Argentine town to the halls of prison, Rafael lived and died as one of the most infamous figures of his generation, a man whose life forces us to question the thin line between justice and vengeance, morality and madness, human and monster. Legends never truly die, sometimes, they only become whispers in the dark. Rafael's life ended in a sudden burst of violence on that quiet Argentine street, but the story did not end with his death. In fact, for many, it had only just begun. His name became a legend whispered among criminals, law enforcement, and ordinary citizens alike. Some called him a monster. Others called him a dark hero, a man who punished those who wronged the innocent, yet did so in ways no one could fully comprehend. The city where Rafael grew up was forever changed by his actions. Murders, ambushes, and acts of vengeance left a permanent mark on the streets. Families remembered his victims, while others whispered of his brutal sense of justice. Even decades after his release, Rafael's presence lingered in stories, warnings, and urban folklore. Children in the neighborhoods he had terrorized grew up hearing tales of the young fugitive who had taken on entire gangs, executed criminals, and even killed his own father in a grisly act of retribution. In the years following his death, journalists, podcasters, and content creators tried to piece together his life. Some claimed to have interviewed those who had survived his wrath. Others dug through court records and prison files, piecing together a timeline of the boy who became a man feared by all. Every detail, from his first murders as a teenager to his social media reinvention in his later years, painted a picture of a man who lived by his own set of rules, a man who had blurred the lines between morality and vengeance so completely that few could understand him. Even his online presence became part of his legend. Videos of Rafael sharing life lessons, his baptism, and even casual vlogs became viral long after his death. Some followers saw him as a cautionary tale, a man who had chosen violence and had paid a deadly price. Others viewed him as a symbol of absolute justice, a flawed, violent avenger in a world where the law often failed. Social media debates raged over whether he was a hero or a villain, a man of conscience or a remorseless killer. Yet, beneath the legend and the myths, the reality was stark. Rafael's life was a testament to the extremes of human nature. He had been shaped by injustice and tragedy from a young age, and he responded to the world with cold, calculated brutality. His story forced people to ask uncomfortable questions. Can a person be truly evil and still have a moral code? Can vengeance ever be justified, and if so, to what extent? How much darkness can a single human bear before it consumes everything around them? Even law enforcement, who had spent decades chasing him, reflected on Rafael's legacy. Some officers admitted that he was more than just a criminal, he was a phenomenon, a case study in human psychology and morality gone astray. Behavioral experts dissected his life, from the first murders to his acts in prison and his eventual social media reinvention, attempting to understand a mind that had balanced cruelty with a twisted sense of justice. Rafael's legend extended beyond Argentina. Online forums, international crime document. Rafael's life was a chilling reminder of how far a person can go when vengeance and justice collide. But now I want to hear from you. What would you do if faced with injustice like his? Could you resist the darkness, or would you follow the same path? Comment your thoughts below, and if you want more gripping true crime stories like Rafael's, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Remember, some legends are written in blood, and some shadows never fade.